When Ethan discovers his wife Kayla's affair with a charming colleague, his world crumbles. Driven by betrayal, he crafts a plan to expose her in the most humiliating way possible, during a party filled with her colleagues and friends. But as the night unfolds and secrets come to light, Ethan realizes too late the devastating cost of revenge. In a shocking turn, his carefully orchestrated justice sets off a tragic chain of events, leaving him questioning if vengeance was worth the price. A gripping tale of love, betrayal, and the unforeseen consequences of heartbreak. The day began like any other, a mundane routine of coffee, breakfast, and a hurried goodbye as Kayla rushed out the door, her heels clicking against the pavement. I watched her leave, clutching her bag tightly, her phone already pressed to her ear. She had always been a force of nature, ambitious, confident, unstoppable. I loved that about her. Or I thought I did. We had been married for 9 years, and while our life together wasn't perfect, I thought it was solid. Sure, there were arguments, about her work, about my long hours coding late into the night, but nothing that seemed insurmountable. Until recently. Over the past few months, things had shifted. Kayla had landed a promotion at her company, a well-deserved step up to head of her department. I was proud of her. But with the new role came long nights, weekend meetings, and a phone that never stopped buzzing. Work, she'd say, brushing off my questions with a tired smile. Just work. I wanted to believe her. I told myself it was the stress of the job, the pressure of managing a larger team. But the late nights turned into overnight trips. The texts became more secretive. She started dressing differently, sleek, expensive outfits that hugged her figure in ways I hadn't seen since our early dating days. I tried to ignore the nagging feeling in my chest, the one that whispered something wasn't right. It wasn't until I found the receipt that the whispers turned into screams. I was cleaning the living room one Saturday afternoon when I stumbled across it. Kayla's latest novel lay open on the coffee table, her bookmark a crumpled slip of paper. I picked it up, intending to tuck it back into place, but the bold letters caught my eye: Lakeview Boutique Hotel, one-night stay. The date was last Thursday. I frowned, trying to recall if Kayla had mentioned a work trip. She hadn't. Team bonding, she said later when I asked her about it, her voice casual but her smile tight. You know how these corporate retreats are. It was last minute. I didn't want to bother you with it. Something about the way she said it, the quick explanation, the way she avoided my eyes, set my nerves on edge. But I didn't press her. I told myself I was overthinking, that she wouldn't lie to me. She wouldn't. Would she? The doubts gnawed at me, growing louder with each passing day. I tried to shake them off, focusing instead on work, on the app one was developing for a new client. But no amount of code could drown out the unease in my mind. I started noticing things, how she always kept her phone face down, how she excused herself to take calls in the other room. How she seemed distant. I decided to investigate. I wasn't proud of it. Spying on your wife wasn't exactly the hallmark of a healthy marriage. But I needed answers, and she wasn't giving them to me. So one night, after she had fallen asleep, I crept downstairs and opened her laptop. My heart pounded as I navigated to her email, half expecting to find nothing, half dreading what I might uncover. The messages were innocuous at first, notes from coworkers, reminders about meetings. But then I saw his name, Grant Wallace. A senior executive at her company. They had exchanged dozens of emails, some professional, others less so. The tone was playful, familiar. Too familiar. My stomach twisted as I read through them, my worst fears taking shape. The emails hinted at late-night drinks, inside jokes, shared moments that didn't belong to me. But it wasn't until I saw the video that the truth became undeniable. I had installed a small camera in Kayla's car weeks ago, hoping to ease my suspicions. I didn't check the footage often, just enough to convince myself that nothing was amiss. But tonight, something told me to look. The grainy footage played on my screen, the audio muffled but clear enough to hear their laughter. Kayla and Grant, sitting in her car, their faces inches apart. She leaned into him, her hand on his arm, and then, God help me, she kissed him. It wasn't a peck or a moment of weakness. It was passionate, intimate. Familiar. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking. The world I had built with Kayla, the life we had created together, crumbled before me. I wanted to confront her, to scream and demand answers. But a voice in the back of my mind stopped me. Not yet. If she was willing to betray me, I would make sure she paid the price. Not with anger or violence, but with precision. Revenge, after all, was a dish best served cold. And I intended to serve it ice cold. That night, as Kayla slept soundly beside me, I began to plan. The days that followed were a blur of quiet observation and meticulous planning. Kayla went about her life as though nothing had changed, her laughter ringing through the house, her smile as radiant as ever. But now, every time she touched my arm or kissed my cheek, it felt like poison seeping into my skin. I knew the truth, and yet I said nothing. Not yet. Instead, I focused on gathering more evidence. It wasn't enough to confront her with a single video or a handful of flirty emails. I wanted irrefutable proof, something she couldn't deny or twist into an excuse. So, I doubled down on my efforts, installing a tracker on her phone and syncing it to mine. Every message, every call, every location, it was all at my fingertips. At first, it felt invasive, wrong even. But the more I saw, the more justified I felt. The texts between her and Grant were explicit, detailing stolen moments during lunch breaks and plans for future rendezvous. They spoke in code, but their intentions were clear. Worse still, they mocked me, Grant joking about keeping the husband clueless and Kayla laughing along. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. Exploding now would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they had rattled me. No, I would bide my time. Let her dig her own grave. One evening, while Kayla was in the shower, I accessed her laptop again. This time, I found a calendar invite for an upcoming holiday party at our home, a party Kayla had pitched as a way to impress her bosses. I knew now it was more than that. Grant would be there. They both would be. And so would I. The night of the party arrived, and our house was transformed. Twinkling lights adorned the windows, the scent of catered hors d'oeuvres filled the air, and a string quartet played softly in the corner of the living room. Kayla had spared no expense, insisting on making the evening perfect. She flitted around the room like a social butterfly, her laughter infectious as she charmed every guest who crossed her path. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. She looked stunning. Radiant. Deceptive. I watched her from across the room, sipping my drink and playing the role of the doting husband. No one in that room would have guessed the storm brewing beneath the surface. Grant arrived fashionably late, his confident stride drawing the attention of everyone around him. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with the kind of charisma that could make anyone feel like they were the only person in the room. I hated him instantly. But tonight, I didn't show it. I greeted him warmly, shaking his hand and offering him a drink. The perfect host. Kayla's eyes lit up when she saw him, a flicker of excitement she tried to mask but failed. They exchanged polite pleasantries in front of me, but I caught the brief touch of their hands, the way her gaze lingered on his a moment too long. My stomach churned, but I kept my composure. As the night wore on, the guests mingled, laughed, and toasted to the year's successes. Kayla seemed to relax, her guard slipping as she indulged in glass after glass of wine. I watched her carefully, waiting for the right moment. It came after dinner, as the string quartet transitioned to a livelier tune and guests began to gather in the makeshift dance area. Kayla was at the center of it, her hand resting lightly on Grant's arm as they spoke in hushed tones. I approached them, my smile unwavering. "Kayla," I said, placing a hand on her back. "Would you mind helping me with something in the den? It'll only take a minute." She hesitated, glancing at Grant, but then nodded. "Of course." I led her down the hallway to the den, away from the noise and laughter. She looked at me curiously, her brow furrowed. "What's this about, Ethan?" I closed the door behind us, leaning against it as I crossed my arms. "I need to talk to you. About us." Her expression softened, and for a brief moment, she looked like the woman I fell in love with. "Ethan, is everything okay? You've been so distant lately." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Distant? That's rich coming from you." "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her tone defensive. "It means I know, Kayla," I said, my voice low but steady. "I know about you and Grant. I've seen the texts, the emails. I've seen the video." Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words. "Ethan, Don't," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Don't insult me by trying to deny it. I've known for weeks." She sank into the armchair, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You betrayed me, Kayla. You betrayed our marriage. Our family." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Not yet. She had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was going to end it." I scoffed. "Don't bother. I'm ending it for you." She looked up at me, confusion and fear in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, turning toward the door. "Now, clean yourself up. Your guests are waiting." As I walked back to the party, my heart pounded with anticipation. The night wasn't over, and the real show was about to begin. The house was alive with laughter and chatter as I returned to the party, but it felt distant, hollow. I moved through the crowd, smiling and nodding at guests, my mind focused on what was to come. Kayla emerged from the hallway minutes later, her face composed, though her eyes betrayed the storm brewing within her. She avoided me, throwing herself into conversations with anyone who would listen, clinging to the illusion of normalcy. Good. Let her think she still had control of the narrative. It would make the fall that much sweeter. As the clock ticked closer to 9, I stepped onto the small platform we'd set up for the speeches. I tapped a fork against my glass, the sound cutting through the hum of conversation. "Everyone," I began, my voice carrying over the room, "thank you for coming tonight. It's an honor to have so many of Kayla's esteemed colleagues and friends here in our home. This evening is a celebration of success, both hers and yours." Polite applause rippled through the room, Kayla smiling tightly as she glanced at me from her spot near the bar. Grant stood beside her, his hand casually resting on the counter. The sight of him made my jaw tighten, but I pressed on. "I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge my wife," I said, my gaze locking onto hers. "Kayla, you've worked tirelessly to build your career, and I couldn't be prouder of everything you've achieved. Tonight is for you." She looked relieved, even touched, as the crowd clapped again. I let the applause die down before continuing. "But," I added, "it's not just a night to celebrate the past. It's a night to look to the future. And in that spirit, I have a little something to share, a glimpse, if you will, into the hard work that's been happening behind the scenes." I gestured to the projector at the back of the room. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence as the video began to play. The laughter was the first sound to break through, the unmistakable sound of Kayla and Grant, caught on camera in the intimate confines of her car. Gasps echoed through the room as the video continued, the damning evidence unfolding before everyone's eyes. Kayla's hand on his arm. his lips brushing against hers. The stolen kiss that shattered the facade of our marriage. I didn't watch the video. I didn't need to. I watched the faces instead, the shock, the disbelief, the awkward shuffling as people exchanged glances. And then I watched Kayla, her face drained of color, her wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. "Ethan," she gasped, stepping forward as if to stop the video, but it was too late. The damage was done. The video ended abruptly, the room plunging into an oppressive silence. I stepped down from the platform, my expression calm, almost serene. Kayla turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "How could I?" I repeated, my voice cold. "The better question is, how could you?" Grant, who had been rooted to the spot, finally found his voice. "Ethan, this is a private matter. We should." "You don't get to talk to me," I snapped, my composure cracking for the first time. "Not after what you've done." His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He looked at Kayla, then back at me, clearly unsure of what to do. "You thought you could humiliate me behind closed doors," I continued, my voice steady again. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just sit back and let it happen?" Kayla tried to step closer, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said sharply. "You've said enough. Now it's my turn." I turned to the guests, who were watching the scene with a mix of shock and morbid fascination. "I apologize for disrupting the evening," I said, addressing the crowd. "But I thought it was important for everyone to see the truth. Kayla and Grant made their choices, and now they'll face the consequences." The party disbanded quickly after that, guests murmuring their goodbyes as they shuffled toward the door. Some offered me awkward pats on the back, while others avoided my gaze entirely. Kayla stood frozen in the middle of the room, her face streaked with tears as she tried to salvage what was left of her dignity. Grant left without a word, slipping out the back door like a thief in the night. I didn't watch him go. He wasn't my concern anymore. When the house was finally empty, Kayla turned to me, her voice hoarse. "Ethan, please. I can explain." "Explain?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Go ahead. I'd love to hear how you spin this one." "It was a mistake," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I wasn't thinking. I got caught up in the moment. But it didn't mean anything. You're the one I love." I stared at her, incredulous. "You don't get to play the victim, Kayla. Not after what you've done." Her tears fell harder, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just a hollow satisfaction that she was finally feeling a fraction of the pain she had caused me. "This marriage is over," I said, my voice firm. "You can keep the house. I'll be gone by morning. The divorce papers will be on your desk by the end of the week." "Ethan, don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling. Please, just give me another chance." I shook my head, stepping past her toward the stairs. "You already had your chance, Kayla. And you threw it away." I packed my bags in silence that night, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me with every item I placed in the suitcase. By the time dawn broke, I was ready to leave. Kayla didn't try to stop me. She sat on the edge of the bed, her face buried in her hands as I walked out the door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Because if I did, I might remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the dreams we once shared. And I couldn't afford that. Not now. This was my closure. And as the sun rose over the horizon, I drove away, ready to start over. Alone. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I drove without direction, the miles stretching out like the hollow void inside me. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, an unbearable heaviness pressed on my chest, each mile bringing with it a sickening emptiness. The road ahead blurred through the haze of my exhaustion, and I realized I hadn't truly slept in days. I pulled into a rest stop, the engine ticking as it cooled. The world seemed quiet here, still and indifferent to the chaos of my life. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. But the silence wasn't soothing. It was deafening. And somewhere within it, a voice whispered a truth I didn't want to hear. I was free. But at what cost? Kayla had betrayed me, yes, but she had also been my partner, my best friend for nearly a decade. We'd built a life together, shared dreams and laughter, and weathered storms side by side. How had it come to this? How had I let her drift so far away without noticing? I hated her for what she did, for the lies and the deception. But as I sat there in the car, the truth hit me like a blow to the chest. I had failed her too. I had buried myself in work, taken her love for granted, and assumed that our life together would always be enough. I hadn't fought for her when it mattered, and now, when it was too late, I was left holding the shattered pieces of what we once had. The sun dipped low in the sky as I pulled back onto the highway, my destination still uncertain. My mind replayed the events of the party in an endless loop, the shock on Kayla's face, the whispers of the guests, the weight of finality in her tearful pleas. I'd thought revenge would bring me peace, but it had only deepened the void. By nightfall, I found myself back in the city, the familiar streets both comforting and suffocating. I parked a few blocks away from the house and walked the rest of the way, my footsteps heavy with hesitation. I didn't know why I was there. Maybe I wanted to see her one last time, to say something, anything, that might bring closure to this nightmare. The house was dark when I arrived, the once welcoming glow of the porch light extinguished. I hesitated at the driveway, unsure of what I was hoping to find. My heart pounded as I approached the front door, the key still in my pocket even though it felt like I no longer belonged there. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the house was eerily silent. I called out her name, but the words seemed to vanish into the stillness. My pulse quickened as I moved through the rooms, each one as empty as the last. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement from the den, the door slightly ajar. My stomach turned as I pushed it open, the sight inside freezing me in place. Kayla was slumped in the armchair, her face pale and serene, her body unnaturally still. A bottle of pills lay overturned on the side table, its contents spilled across the floor like a silent scream. Beside it was a crumpled note, the words scrawled in her familiar handwriting. Ethan. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to live with what I've done. You were my world, and I destroyed everything we built together. I thought I could move on, that I could make myself happy, but all I found was emptiness. And now, I've hurt the one person who ever truly loved me. I'm sorry. For everything. Kayla. I dropped to my knees, the note slipping from my trembling hands. My mind screamed at me to do something, anything, but I was paralyzed by the weight of what I was seeing. It felt like the walls were closing in, the world collapsing around me as the realization sank in. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to face her mistakes, to rebuild her life without me. She wasn't supposed to. Tears blurred my vision as I reached for her, my fingers brushing against her cold hand. I called her name, my voice cracking, but there was no response. No life. No second chance. In my quest for revenge, I had destroyed her, just as she had destroyed me. And now, there was no way to take it back. The paramedics arrived quickly after my frantic call, but it was already too late. They moved with quiet efficiency, their faces a mask of professional detachment as they carried her away. I stood in the doorway, numb and hollow, watching the flashing lights disappear into the night. The silence that followed was unbearable. I returned to the den, the note still lying on the floor. I picked it up, staring at the words until they blurred into meaningless shapes. My mind replayed the moments leading to this, each decision and misstep that had brought us here. I had wanted justice, but all I had found was tragedy. I had thought I was walking away from the wreckage of our marriage. But in the end, I had only ensured that we both burned in the flames. And now, I was alone. Completely, irrevocably alone.